Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have a lot of people joining us today, so we're just going to give it a minute or so before we get started. So thank you. All right, I will go ahead and start to kick us off. Welcome to our Zebra Dev Talk today. We have a great session planned for you and excited that you decided to join us today. Before we get started, I just want to go through some meeting logistics with you. The session is being recorded and the recording will be available to you on YouTube in about a week. All of your phone lines are muted, so we cannot see or hear you during this presentation. We will try to answer your questions at the end of the session if time permits. So use the questions feature in the webinar panel on your screen. Also, be sure to use the QR codes or the links that will be provided during the webinar session, as they contain valuable resources. And before we get started with Daniel, I am going to go through a few slides on resources and events that are specific for our developer community. To start, I'm going to play a quick video that highlights our Zebra Developer Portal. For those of you who have joined our Dev Talks before, you might have seen this in the past, and if so, you do have about a minute to grab a cup of coffee. For those of you joining us for the first time, please be sure to watch this. Our video goes through a quick overview of where key tools, resources, and information can be found on our portal. Let's take a look.
Learn, connect, build, all in one place. The Zebra Developer Portal. As an enterprise software developer, you need fast and easy access to technical information, documentation, and tutorials. You also want to connect with your peers, share and consume information to build your knowledge and competencies. The updated Zebra Developer Portal has you covered. Product pages give you quick access to product overviews, tutorials, documentation, use cases, forums, and blogs about specific products, all indexed with quick links to key developer information to help you build. Forums within the Zebra developer community make it easy to connect with your peers and find answers to your specific development questions to help you collaborate and build. Community blogs feature content from Zebra engineers and other developer experts, all sharing the latest technologies and tools to enable your development on enterprise devices. Developer events provide knowledge and networking opportunities for our developer community. Be sure to scroll through the upcoming and past events for registration information and access to on-demand content. The Zebra Developer Portal provides enterprise developers like you with the tools and services you need to build your edge. With an easy-to-use interface, you will be sure to find the resources and connections you need to build all your enterprise applications. Devices built by us, apps built by you.
Great. So in addition to our developer portal, we also invite you to join our developer community on our various social channels. You could join us on LinkedIn, X, GitHub, and listen to our first series of our developer webcasts that are available. Use the QR code that's on your screen or the links that are being pushed out to access our communities. And finally, before handing it off to Daniel, I am excited to announce that Zebra will be attending and sponsoring DroidCon in Berlin, London, and New York later this year. It's been a long time since we have been in participation in the US, so we're excited that we're expanding outside of EMEA, and we look forward to meeting many of you there. Be sure to look into attending DroidCon, and if you do, stop by our booths. Now I'm going to hand it off to Daniel to go through the content that you've been waiting for, DataWedge updates. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Maria. So, hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone connected from all around the world. So, Maria, if you can go to the next slide, please. And yeah, so just 1 minute also from my side, just wanted to present myself. So my name is Daniel Namtu, and I'm a software sales engineer for Zebra Technologies and developer advocate, primarily covering the EMEA region. I've been with Zebra for over 2 years now. And before joining Zebra, I've been doing Android development as a full-time job. So I have pretty good experience around Android in general, not just developing, but of the operating system itself. And yeah, I've been doing Android development for over 7 years now. You can also find me on LinkedIn if you want to. I'm posting sometimes over there as well. And now to the first part of the session of today, we will go through a couple of the DataWedge updates. I mean, some features that have been introduced in DataWedge recently. And before jumping to that, I would just like to spend a couple of minutes and talk about why DataWedge should be considered as the first option compared to the MDK or the enterprise browser barcode APIs. So there are numerous reasons why DataWedge should be considered as the first option, and primarily because DataWedge implements an intent-based API system, so it is much more easier to implement inside any application. And we are not just talking about native kind of applications being developed with Kotlin or Java, but we're also talking about applications being developed with custom frameworks. So in this case, talking about React Native, for instance, .NET MAUI, or even Flutter, for instance. And this is because it's easier to work with the intents, the bundles, and the broadcast receivers in such situations compared to a library, which obviously needs to be supported, needs to be written for each one of these frameworks. So it offers some more flexible way of working with the scanner. There are also numerous features currently getting released on DataWedge and not on the EMDK barcodes API side, and same also for the enterprise browser APIs. And if you take a look at the tech docs, so probably you already saw that. So if you take a look at the tech docs on the enterprise browser page, or even on the NDK page, you will see a red banner popping up at the top of the page, showing you that it is advised to use DataWedge instead of the EMDK scanning APIs. And this is because new features getting released now on DataWedge, there's no guarantee that these are also going to get released in the MDK as well, or the enterprise browser APIs. And also there are no differences between DataWedge or the MDK system. So the features available on the MDK side are primarily the same ones being available in DataWedge, so you wouldn't lose anything if you were to transition to DataWedge. It is also less tricky to work with the DataWedge intent APIs because we had different situations in the past with customers or users, developers working with the MDK scanning APIs having issues with the scanner, where basically the scanner was malfunctioning in some specific use cases, and the user had to reboot the device because of that. And this is because it is very easy to mess up with the MDK manager on the code side. So this is why also we are suggesting to use DataWedge, because it's also much more easier for the developer. And also because DataWedge is considered as the middleware between your application and the scanner, so the hardware part of the scanner, instead of the MDK, which is considered to have a direct connection to the hardware of the scanner. So there's no middleware when you're working with the MDK APIs. But there are also some situations when the MDK is still considered as a good option, let's say, and these are just isolated cases. And the first one is when maybe the developer is looking to have as much control as possible over the hardware scanner, thing which maybe by using this library and, for instance, not wanting to have any sort of middleware in between, you would use the NDK in that situation. There are also other use cases when we are using external tools like IDs that are allowing you to create modular applications by blocks. I can name one, for instance, Calypso Studio. That's an IDE used for that use case to create modular applications. And in that case, it is better to use the EMDK jar file. And this is because last time I checked, probably has changed now, but last time I checked, it is not possible to work with the intent-based APIs with DataWedge. So in that case, the EMDK library is supported, so you will use that one instead. So there are also isolated use cases such as these ones. And of course, there are also situations when we are having old projects, like legacy projects, running on old Android versions. So they have been built with the old standard way of working with the scanner, thing which was not possible in the past with DataWedge, because DataWedge came a little bit later. So in that case, you have the NDK working good in the project. You don't want to touch the code bases. So yes, also in that situations, you should still keep using the NDK if it's working correctly without any sorts of issues. So hopefully this helps you a little bit for those who have still having confusion about DataWedge and the NDK scanning APIs. Next slide, please, Maria. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about a couple of the features which have been introduced into DataWedge. And the first one I want to touch base with is the image capture, so the workflow image capture. And this is a nice feature. They came out, if I remember correctly, 2 years ago. Yes, if I remember correctly. So it's a feature built into DataWedge, which is going to enable you to highlight barcodes which could be present in a captured image, and you can use the imager or the camera to do that. So you take the device, take a picture by using DataWedge, and DataWedge will automatically highlight all the available barcodes from that image. And we have two ways on capturing this image, either by highlighting only the barcodes, or we can highlight the barcodes and at the same time also decode them. And as you can see from the screenshot on the right side, we are getting back also the information related to those highlighted barcodes. Next slide, please. All right, so this is another interesting feature that came out recently. So this one is called the Freeform OCR, so workflow Freeform OCR. This is another feature from the workflow category. And this feature is powered by the MLKit library, the MLKit text recognition library from Google, the V2 version. So what it does is that it will automatically capture any text from any surface on which you are pointing your camera. So it's going to be supported through the imager or the camera, so same as the previous feature. And we have the ability in this case, as you can see from the screenshot, we can either work on the full viewfinder. So we can work on the full viewfinder with the camera, or we can just use a specific area around the object that we are trying to get the text from. And the way on how this will work is you're gonna take the device, you can invoke the feature from DataWedge. So you can test all of this also from the DW demo, for example, and you can capture the text by pointing the camera or the imager, and you will also be able to check the text underneath live every time you are moving the camera, so you are sure that the result is the right one. Then DataWedge will tell you to approve it, and once it's approved, DataWedge will return back the result back to your application. So in this case, on the right side, we have the W demo. So we can have the return of the image in full or cropped, and we can use resizable frame, like I was saying, and the text is going to be captured under 3 different components. So we will have blocks, lines, and elements. So blocks will refer to paragraphs. To give you an example, lines will be referred to words which are considered to be on the same axis, and then we have elements that are considered as one word consisting to multiple characters. So just to give you a definition of how these 3 components are defined. Next slide, please, Maria. And if we can take a look at the code side, same as any feature being used in DataWedge, we can register a broadcast receiver to receive any data coming from DataWedge, and also in this case, the information getting returned by DataWedge for the capture text is going to come under stringified form of a JSON array, and you can see on the right side. An example of this. And for each JSON object, there will always be the line and the block reference for each element. And in this case, the very first element of any JSON array that we are going to get will be the actual image. So you can also decode the image as well. And there's documentation on how to do that on TechDocs. And the params, in this case, the string data, the group ID, and the block label are all referencing the 3 components that we were discussing previously. So lines, blocks, lines, and characters, basically. So those three params are going to be referenced to those 3 components mentioned before. So very last feature I wanted to touch base on is the pick list OCR. So this is very recent. I think it came out end of last year for some BSPs. And this feature is something that is combining it's something that combines capturing barcodes or text inside one single feature. And we can use pick list OCR to capture barcodes or text via the imager or the camera by specifying also different sets of rules. And each rule will consist in 4 different parameters: minimum length, the maximum length, the contains, which will consist into a set of alphanumeric characters, and we can also specify the ignore case sensitivity as well. And the text in this case will be captured into the form of words based on the defined OCR data rules that we are setting. And as you can see on the right side of the screenshot on the right side, you can see that all the barcodes that are following the rules that I've set will come out, will be returned back with the cropped image, but instead the barcodes that were captured, but they were not following the rules, they are coming back without the actual image. And also in this case, I forgot to mention about the text recognition feature, that multiple languages scripts are supported. So Latin is the default one, but others are supported as well. And that's Picklist OCR. So if we can go to the next slide. So one more thing about DataWedge before transitioning to Identity Guardian is related to a library. So for those who are working with DataWedge, probably they are aware about the about how difficult it could be sometimes to work with DataWedge on the code side, like for instance creating complex configurations and working with the nested bundles. Probably some of you listening right now are aware about this, about the struggle. So what I wanted to say is that so a colleague of us, I mean, is no longer a colleague with in Zebra, but he came out with this original idea, and I've kept working on this library. Essentially, this is a library that is gonna wrap some of this complexity and some of this boilerplate code that the developer has to deal with them. So why I'm saying this? So when DataWedge was created, so only a handful of features were included inside the application. And the problem with DataWedge, so I'm saying it openly, the problem with DataWedge now is that we kept adding features and features over, and the current architecture of DataWedge is quite complex. It's very difficult now to change it, but that doesn't mean that we cannot create wrappers or libraries around DataWedge to make our lives easier. So this library, which I'm gonna say it right now, is not officially supported by Zebra. So it's not officially supported by us, but you can reach out to me anytime if you want to know more about it. And we're also going to share the link about the repository on GitHub. This is a library that's going to wrap some of the logic of DataWedge, allowing you to work in a much more easier way in the code. So instead of working with bundles, you will work with methods and builders. So if you're aware on how builders are working in Java, for instance, in Java, we were used to use a lot the builders. It's going to work in a similar way. It's going to follow the same architecture as DataWedge in terms of names, structure, and parameters. So it's not going to be a completely different thing compared to how DataWedge actually works right now with the intent APIs. And the good thing about this is that it's going to be open source. So it's open source. You can always check it. You can also take inspiration from this in case you want to use it. It will be interesting to see if you have any ideas about that. So really open to see if any one of you will be looking to use it. And now if we take a look at the next slide, you will actually understand better what I mean by simplifying the code. And this is because on the left side, we have the traditional way on working with DataWedge by creating a very simple profile by enabling the intent output, disabling the keystroke output, and by associating an application with two different activities and sending the intent with the broadcast. So you can see how many lines of code we need to write just to accomplish this task. And you can see then on the right side how we can simplify all that boilerplate code by just wrapping this sort of logic with the library. So it's the exact same code, so nothing is missing from this, but it's hiding much of the of what you are supposed to write every time in your code, and it's also less possible to get into mistakes, if you know what I mean, because working with bundles, you will have to always input the constants, for the extras and the values, and there's a high percentage rate that you will encounter mistakes, and you will have headaches by searching where the issues is. And instead with this sort of library, it's going to be less, I mean, it's going to be you will not have this sort of issues, because working with methods, it's direct, you're not working with any sort of constants, you're working with enums as well, so you can know exactly what you're picking for the values. And gonna stop here with this. So in case of you, if you're interested, make sure to take a look at the library. And now we will go to Identity Guardian. So Identity Guardian, so Identity Guardian came out this year, so it's really fresh. Came out this year, back in February. It's the newest member of the MDNA family, and Identity Guardian is essentially a solution that will allow users to easily authenticate on all devices by using multi-factor authentication and by leveraging facial biometrics. Probably the local teams from your regions already had a chat with you about this, or probably not. In any case, make sure to reach out also to your local team in case you want to have more information about this. So Identity Guardian will also integrate with different SSO providers, and we will see that more in a second. And the main point about Identity Guardian is to try to simplify the login experience to the user by minimizing the time needed to authenticate all the time on the device, and also by optimizing the time needed to use the applications, especially if we are going to use an SSO provider to log in also to those applications, so it will work in a more smooth way. We will also provide different personalization options and different settings which you can customize on Identity Guardian, and those are going to be exposed by different managed configurations. So those managed configurations can be set from any EMM supporting managed configurations. So it can be SOT, it can be 42 gears, it can be Workspace ONE, and of course also our MDNA cloud. So you can also set up Identity Guardian from our MDNA cloud as well. And we will also touch base about the personalization in a second. So yeah, it's okay, it's okay. So we can take a look at how the integration can work in a shared device environment. And this is because Identity Guardian not just offers a way to authenticate on a personal own device inside a company, but we can also use it to authenticate ourselves inside a shared device environment, which means that I'm in a warehouse, for example, and I need to share my device with a couple of other workers because we are having different shifts. So in that case, my colleague will use the device and will have access to its applications, and it will automatically log in by using their credentials. And we have three different ways on how we can use Identity Guardian. So the first one is meant to be used when we want to provision a new user. The second one will be used for the shared device environments, so for authentication. And then we have a third one, which will be used for authentication, but on a personally owned device. So in that case, we'll be talking about devices being used only by one single person. So the initial process on how we can get a new user enrolled is by having the application running. So by having an Identity Guardian running on a device which is used only to enroll the users. So in that case, we will follow the wizard, the procedure, and a QR code will be created and will be saved on the device, so you can later export it however you want it, and you can also print it, of course, because this QR code is meant to be used later on as a badge, so like a badge to authenticate them. And this QR code will be encrypted. So very important here, the QR code is not cannot be decrypted in any way, not even by the company. So that's a major point to be said right from the beginning. So it's not possible to decrypt it. So later on, the user has their QR code. So we pick the device, we scan the barcode. So we scan our barcode, then the user will facial authenticate themselves, and if the information contained from the barcode matches the ones from the face, then the user will automatically be signed into the device. Now, a couple of points to be said here. What does the QR code contains? So it contains information about the user and a couple of the information like the role being assigned to the user and a couple of other details. And it contains the information about their face, of course, fully encrypted, like I said before. So the decryption is being done not by the Identity Guardian, but it's being done by the Android operating system. So everything is being performed inside the sandbox, and Identity Guardian will only get the actual result when performing the comparison between the data from the QR code and the actual data coming when mapping the face. So if those information are correct and matches, so they are matching, then automatically the user would be signed into the device. So key advantages about this, so the employee will always be in control over the personal data because it's an encrypted barcode and it can always be discarded when it's necessary. An employee can also opt not to use biometrics, for instance, and instead they can access the device through a secure unique PIN. And like we were saying, Identity Guardian supports multi-factor authentication, so we can always create different ways on how a user is supposed to access the device. We can also have we can also scan, for example, the barcode, facial authenticate ourselves, and then the employee, the user, will also have to input a PIN just to have an extra layer of security. So we can also do that with Identity Guardian as well. There are multiple ways on how we can set up Identity Guardian on the device, and it would take way too much to explain everything inside a session like this. And then the employees can also use any device inside the organization. That's true. The only minimum requirement for Identity Guardian is to have a minimum of Android 11 version. So the device needs to run Android 11 minimum. So it cannot be used on Android 10 or 9 or 8. So Android 11 has to be on the device. And there's no limit on how many devices I can use. I can authenticate on any device running Identity Guardian. And I don't need to have an internet connection in order to do that. So Identity Guardian can be used also in a closed network environment because it's going to work without requiring any sort of internet connection, because it's not going to reach out to any sort of server to check the data or those kind of processes. So you can also use it in a locked environment. The only situation when you're going to need the internet connection is when setting up Identity Guardian on the device. So in the usual situation, you can also be in a warehouse that is not using an internet connection, for instance, and you can still use Identity Guardian on the device. You can customize the employee's device experience according to their roles. So this is another interesting thing to do with Identity Guardian, which I was mentioning at the beginning in terms of personalization. So during the setup wizard, when we enroll a user, it will also ask us to define the role of this user. And in this case, we can specify and use as many roles as we want when personalizing Identity Guardian. So I can have, for instance, the normal employee user, I can have the manager role, I can have the super admin role, and so on. So you can define all those through manage configurations. But the good thing about this is that we can use Identity Guardian together with Enterprise Home Screen. And I'm saying this because recently Enterprise Home Screen has introduced an update which will let you use multiple configurations role-based. So in case you're going to use Enterprise Home Screen together with the Identity Guardian, you can set up for the Enterprise Home Screen specific XML configurations based on the role that you are going to use for your users. So if you are having the employee role, you can create an XML configuration for Enterprise Home Screen, and then the employee will have a different UI of the Enterprise Home Screen. And same goes also for the other roles. So for instance, if the admin, the super admin is logging on the device, it will have access on many other things compared to the normal employee, because we will have a different configuration. Can you go back a little bit, Maria? Yeah, so another thing I wanted to mention is that we can also set up expiring date and time for the barcodes which we are creating for the users. So in case you have any temporary workers using Identity Guardian, you can also set up an expire date, and then automatically those QR codes can be discarded after the expiration date. So next slide, please. All right, so now that we have a more general idea of how Identity Guardian works, let's take a look at how we can use it in a personal device deployment, in a personal device environment. So we do the setup wizard. So the user has, in this case, an assigned device. The user creates the personal login by following the wizard. And here in this case, the QR code, so the information will be stored on the device. And we don't need, in this case, to scan the QR code because this device will be used by the same user. So in this situation, the QR code will be stored on the device, and when Identity Guardian will perform the check when the user is trying to log in, it will just ask for the face so the user will just have to facial authenticate themselves, and then the data will be compared to the only credential being available on the device, and the user will be signed in later on. Key advantages about this, so I already mentioned the first and the second one. One other thing to mention is that you or the IT manager will also have visibility about the security being used on the device. So we can actually check that, for instance, on MDNA Cloud. So we can have a list of all the devices and the credentials being used, and we can also check what kind of security is being used at the moment. And the IT will also have the ability to override the screen lock for troubleshooting without having access to personal data. So that's also another thing to consider whenever we will encounter any sort of issues. Next slide, please. All right. So the SSO. So I mentioned before that we are integrating, Identity Guardian is integrating with some third-party SSO providers. So in this case, we have support for Microsoft, we have support for Ping ID, and we will also we will also provide support for Okta coming up later this year. So how the SSO support will work? Well, whoever will use Identity Guardian, they will be able to also set up the SSO configuration as well when setting up Identity Guardian through the managed configurations. So we have documentation on how to do that available as well on the tech docs. And the typical workflow will be as follows. So the user will pick up the device, will pick a device for the shift. The user will then authenticate themselves will scan the barcode, will authenticate themselves with the facial with the face, and then the user will be signed into the device. And right after that, if we also providing SSO support, then Identity Guardian will launch the window for the login on the SSO provider. So the user will then follow the login process from the SSO provider, and then once the authentication is successful, the user will also have direct access to the applications integrating or leveraging that SSO provider. So in case you have a device running on Microsoft applications, like the Office suite of applications, you will automatically be logged in on those applications. So you will not be required to re-input every time the credentials in order to use the device, to use the applications on the device. And the same process will work also in reverse. So if a new user will authenticate on the device, then Identity Guardian will remove any left authentication from the previous user. Then the applications will also log out from the previous user, and the new user will be able to authenticate and use the applications with their credentials. And there's also an interesting thing about this, that we if we leave the device, for instance, on the table, or we are not using the device for some time, like a couple of minutes, because we are doing something else. So in that case, the device will be locked back again. So the device would repick the device. It's the same user using the device. It will scan the barcode, facial authenticate themselves again, but it will not require the user to re-authenticate for the SSO. And this is because Identity Guardian will recognize that this is the same user using the device. So another smart way on how Identity Guardian will handle this this situation. Now, if we go forward, Identity Guardian will also provide enablement via some APIs. So we are providing also some APIs which can be used in an Entry project. So these are going to work to provide, for example, alerts about new users signing on, to show who has signed on the device. Can be used also to identify the user's role, or even to register the time they sign on onto the device. And if we can take a closer look at the actual APIs at the next slide, we actually have 6 different APIs which can be used. And in this case, we are not talking about a library. We are talking about APIs which can be implemented via a content provider interface. So if you're familiar with the content providers and you're also familiar with other tools that we are offering, it's going to work in a similar way. Like, for example, the OM Info application, which is used to retrieve non-resettable identifiers. So what you will have to do is, for each one of these APIs, you have to get permission through the Access Manager APIs in order to whitelist your application to be able to use one of these APIs. And you will have to use, for each one of these APIs, its delegation scope. So you have to allow your application to use one of the delegation scopes, which in this case, we are referring to the actual APIs. So probably it's a little bit confusing, and probably it's a little bit complex if you hear all of this all at once. But it's not that complex, and I've also created a blog post showing how to work with each one of these APIs. Is available on the developer portal, and probably already saw the link in the chat. And I'm also showing how to actually grant your application permission in order to use one of these APIs. So if you are interested about integrating Identity Guardian with your application, make sure to check out also that blog post in order to help you out a little bit. So just to summarize now, because we're running out of time, last slide, elements of the solution about Identity Guardian. So like I was mentioning, we can use it together with the enterprise home screen, which is going to provide personalization with the different roles which we are going to use for the users on the device. So providing different UX experience based on the roles. We can also use Identity Guardian together with the DNA Cloud to use to see and check what kind of security is being used on the devices by the users, and check also the users being the users which are using the devices. On device APIs, so we can also work with the APIs by integrating Identity Guardian with an application that we are going to use with. And device tracker. So device tracker is also another integration. So it's a tool used to recover lost, stolen, or misplaced devices. And if we use Identity Guardian together with the device tracker, we'll be able to instantly identify the person who used the device in order to help out with the recovery process. And that's pretty much it. We are by the end of the session. So the resources, these are the resources links. So these are already available in the chat. So make sure to give it a look. So DataWedge APIs documentation, link to the library available on GitHub, documentation about Identity Guardian, and also link to the blog post explaining how to use each one of the available Identity Guardian's APIs.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Great presentation. We have a lot of questions that came in. So in the next 8 minutes, I will go ahead and try and get through as many as we can. If we do not get to all your questions, and if you put your questions through under your name and not anonymously, we will follow up with you via email if we can't get to all of them. So let's go ahead and get started if you don't mind. The first set of questions are regarding DataWedge. And these two are somewhat related, so I'll combine them. For the free-form OCR, does the end user always have to adjust the capture area manually, or can they present it via API? And it's similarly, how do they grab the image to do something with it? So kind of on that image grabbing.
Yeah, so this is something that came out quite often. I mean, I had this question popping out a couple of times from different users. Unfortunately, yes, you still need to specify every time. So you always need to redraw the frame whenever you are using the free form. So there is no way to input some specific dimensions when working with the APIs. This is something that I've suggested to the BU. So hopefully it's something that they are going to integrate in a later version of DataWedge.
Great. On DataWedge as well, does the free-form OCR need a connection to Google to operate? That is, does it work when the device is not connected to the internet, and are there any firewall exceptions required?
No, absolutely not. It can work also in an offline mode. So there's no problem with that.
Okay. For DataWedge, is there a sample of how to switch from reading barcodes and RFID tags anywhere?
Can you repeat that question again? Sorry, Maria.
Is there a sample of how to switch from reading barcodes and RFID tags?
So an example, so there is the module which you can use inside DataWedge related to the RFID, and you can enable that through the APIs, and later disable the barcode input. But I don't think we have any. I don't think we have any sample applications available about that, but we have the documentation on TechDocs, so you can check. And I think I'm almost certain that there is an example, a snippet of code on how you can enable the RFID module. I think there is.
Okay, a few more coming in still on DataWedge, and then I'll switch in a minute to the other topic. Will you also be able to choose export path from DataWedge so that you can access the DB without using an SD card and then move it to your computer due to Android 11 and up scope storage? Will you be able? Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, so right now with DataWedge, in order to work out with the limitation introduced with the scope storage, if I remember correctly, we are using the path inside the enterprise partition in order to push the DB file, if I remember correctly, but this is something I need to check because normally I'm not using it that much. So maybe this question, let's take it out in offline. Maybe I will reply to that in an email maybe.
Great. All right, I'm going to switch over to Identity Guardian now, so we could cover a few of those questions. Does Identity Guardian's face recognition feature require Google libraries? Can it work on devices that don't have Google mobile services?
So without Google Play services, I mean, it technically should be used on our devices that are almost all of them equipped with the GMS services, but I don't think they are required. And I'm saying this because recently, if I remember correctly, we've added support also for the WS50. So you can use Identity Guardian also on the WS50. And if you remember, the WS50 is not requiring the GMS is not having the GMS services, so it's running an AOSP based build. So no, it should not require any Google Play services, so it can be used without any problem.
Another one regarding Identity Guardian, what kind of user session data can we retrieve from Identity Guardian's APIs?
So there are multiple information that we can retrieve. I think there are over almost 30 different fields which can be retrieved when we are getting the user session. And right now with the 1.2 version of Identity Guardian, which came out recently, we can also retrieve the types of authentication being used by that user. So there are very multiple things which you can retrieve with the user session, but they are all available on the tech docs.
Okay. Is Identity Guardian a paid service or FOC?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. Is Identity Guardian a paid service or
a paid service? Oh, yes, yes. So there are two variants of Identity Guardian. So there is a free version, but it can only be used with PIN, as authentication method. So it's not going to leverage the facial biometrics, the SSO integration. So it's pretty limited. So I would recommend to use the full version of Identity Guardian, because otherwise you're missing a lot of the actual things that Identity Guardian is bringing. But you can check out and hear about the SKUs and the pricing by working with your local team in case you're interested about it.
Great, Daniel, we are at time. There were still a few more questions, so great topic, a lot of interest in this. We appreciate your expertise and sharing all of this information with us. For those of you that still ask questions, and again, if you identified yourself, we will follow up with you shortly regarding some of your answers and responses. Hopefully you join us next month for our next DevTalk. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.